So today we depart from the regular order of things. Maybe that feels appropriate, given that summer is coming to a close and school is about to begin again. For today, it means that our calendar and our readings look a little different. For most of our summer Sundays, we are in the long green season of the church. Green because it is ordinary time. Time not marked by a major season of the church like Advent, Lent, Christmas, or Easter. It is time for us to hear and meditate on the stories of our Holy Scriptures outside of those seasons of preparation and celebration. This summer, those stories and readings, you've heard them. They've been from the book of Genesis, from Paul's letter to the Romans, and from Matthew's gospel. We will return to all three of these continuous readings next week. A quick teaser. Joseph arrives on the scene in Genesis with his beautiful robe and the great jealousy of his many brothers. Paul continues to impress upon his siblings in Rome that there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. And in Matthew's gospel, we finally leave the string of Jesus' parables to hear the story of Jesus walking on the water. So next Sunday, we will be back to regularly scheduled programming. But today is different. Today we decorate and adorn with white to signify that today is not ordinary. It is a feast day of the church, always marked on August 6th, the feast of the Transfiguration. This year, August 6th happens to fall on a Sunday, and so as we gather this morning, we depart from the regular order of things to celebrate and remember this feast, to remember our Lord revealed and transfigured into his divine glory on the mountaintop. The gospel for this day is from Luke, and we hear that Jesus takes Peter, John, and James with him up the mountain to pray. Prayer is not an out-of-the-ordinary experience or practice for Jesus, especially in the Gospel of Luke. The rhythm of Jesus' day is set to prayer. Jesus makes time for prayer. He needs it. And he teaches his disciples how to pray by showing them how he prays. Jesus makes the space to pray, both with his time and by seeking out places that are separate and apart. I have been inspired all this week by the words from today's collect. They name the experience of Peter, John, and James on the mountain, of seeing Jesus wonderfully transfigured in raiment white and glistening. And then the collect prays these words: "Mercifully grant that we, being delivered from the disquietude of this world, may by faith behold the King in his beauty." Jesus seeks out places where he and his followers can be delivered from the disquietude of the world. Disquietude is not a word that we hear or use every day, at least not a word that I hear or use every day, but wow, is it apt. The disquietude of the world, the state of uneasiness or anxiety of the world. Jesus goes up the mountain with his friends to have a moment of ease, to have a moment of communion with the one who holds all broken and uneasy things. So thinking and meditating on that word disquietude, I've wondered this week about Peter, John, and James as they set out with Jesus on this day. What disquietudes are each of them holding? How much weight of the world are they bearing on their shoulders? Chapter 9 of Luke, the same chapter that contains this story of the Transfiguration, also shares the story of the disciples being sent out. Jesus sends them and gives them authority to proclaim and teach and heal. And then Jesus also tells them to take nothing with them, to trust their care to the people they come to serve. Chapter 9 of Luke also shares the story of the loaves and fish. The disciples say the crowd should go into town to seek food and lodging, and Jesus says, feed them. And then he does. An abundant feast for over 5,000 from the 5 loaves and 2 fish the disciples had. Chapter 9 of Luke also shares Peter's faithful answer to Jesus' question, and who do you say that I am? The Messiah of God, Peter responds. And finally, chapter 9 of Luke also shares that just days before Jesus takes Peter, John, and James up the mountain with him, he says the following to his friends. If any of you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. So there's been just a little bit going on in the lives of these 3. And that's only chapter 9. There are 8 preceding it. These 3 have experienced a lot. They are digesting a lot. Maybe for John, it meant that he knew what it was to come to one of those places that did not welcome his preaching, teaching, and healing. As he shook the dust from his feet and prepared to leave, perhaps he felt the pangs of hunger and his deep thirst and wondered how close the next village was, and if they would welcome the good news of Jesus, and if he could trust Jesus in this work to which he was called. Maybe James was consumed by Jesus' words about denial and taking up his own cross. James wanted to follow Jesus. He was following Jesus, but on most days, he really missed the sound and smell of the sea. He missed putting the boat in at night with his brother and father. He missed the feel of the nets in his hands, especially when they were heavy after a successful night's catch. He missed his prior life. Could he miss it and still follow Jesus? And Peter, maybe Peter was still thinking about that question Jesus had asked, and who do you say that I am? Peter knew what he had answered. He believed it, the Messiah of God, but his head and heart were still running races around what that confession meant, especially when Jesus went on to share that the Messiah must undergo suffering, be rejected, be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. Peter, John, and James are holding disquietude close. They are tense, maybe even irritable. Their sleepiness once they are up the mountain betrays them. Perhaps Jesus woke them even before sunrise to begin their hike, and they were annoyed by that. They would rather have slept in. But up the mountain they go, to a place separate and apart, because Jesus knows that they need to be delivered from the disquietude of the world. Jesus needs that deliverance too, and understands that it must be intentionally sought. Even without a 24-hour news cycle, deliverance from the world's anxiety and unease is not something that just happens. Jesus knows this. He practices this, and so he takes his friends up the mountain. He walks with them and with their disquietude and with his own. And then, while Jesus is in prayer, Peter, John, and James see him transfigured into his heavenly glory. The heavens in that moment affirm what Peter has already confessed, that Jesus is the Messiah, God's Son, the beloved. Peter, James, and John need this vision. We need this vision. The world's unease needs us to experience Jesus transfigured, needs us to glimpse the glory of God. The world's dis-ease needs us to know again, or perhaps even for the first time, that Jesus is the Christ and that Jesus is drawing all things to himself. The disquietude of the world witnesses that all things fall apart. In Jesus the Christ, in Jesus transfigured, all things are held together and are being made well. All of our disquietude, all of the world's disquietude is being made well. We need Jesus transfigured. And as Peter learns, after offering to build dwellings and stay in the glow of this moment, the truth is that we cannot stay away from the disquietude of the world. That's the hard part. We need to seek out the place that is separate and apart, and we have to come back down the mountain. There is work to do and journeys to take. We also have some instructions. The divine voice from the cloud assures Peter, John, and James that Jesus is who they believe he is. And then that voice also says to them, listen to him. Listen to my Son, my chosen. Listen to the Christ who is now making all things new. Having glimpsed Jesus in his glory, we have to come back down the mountain with ears ready to hear in new ways. Where is Jesus calling us? How is the Spirit moving around us? Where do we hear the heartbeat of God pulsing amidst the disquietude of the world? There is no returning to regularly scheduled programming. The disquietude of the world is being disrupted. Where do you hear the steady heartbeat of God pulsing amidst the disquietude? Listen.